In that ancient place, deep inside your soul, where stories are told and stories are carried, there is a kingdom. At the center of this kingdom is a king and a queen. Now, the good news about these people is that they were kind and generous. But at night, when they laid in bed, a deep sorrow slept between them. And the nature of this sorrow was easy to understand. You see, the queen could not have a child. Oh, she'd tried. They went to all the healers in the land, to the physicians, to the shamans. Once, they even bought a potion in the marketplace. But still, she couldn't have a child. So one day, in her sorrow, she left the castle and went out for a walk in the woods. And she found herself sitting on an old log in front of an even older oak tree, gently weeping to herself. And just then, from the oak tree emerged an old woman. And the woman said, "My dear, what troubles you so? I see your heart is filled with sorrow." And the queen told the old woman of her situation. "Ah," said the woman, "easy to solve. Yes, yes. At the next full moon, you must go out to the northeast corner of your garden. Take a cup. Speak your sorrow into the cup and place it upside down on the ground. The next morning when you come out, there will be 2 flowers underneath the cup, a red one and a white one. Whatever you do, eat only the white flower." And with that, the old woman melted back into the oak tree. Well, the queen did exactly as she had been instructed. She went home, she waited for the next new moon, she went out to the northeast corner of the garden, took a cup, spoke her desire into the cup, placed it upside down on the ground. The next morning when she came out and lifted the cup, to her utter astonishment, there was a white flower and a red flower. I don't know why we do this in the face of very sage advice from old women who have emerged from oak trees, but we do. She looked at those 2 flowers, she felt her desire for a child, and she scooped them both up and she gobbled them down. And immediately, in the way that women know, she knew she was with child. Well, she went back to the castle, and the next 9 months passed as they typically do. Now the great night for the birth came. They were up in the room in the tower where these things happen. All the women were there. They were singing songs. They were beating drums, getting ready to welcome this new one into the world. The midwife was there, ready to catch the baby. A cry from the queen, a push, and out popped a little black snaky thing. Oh! The midwife grabbed it, chucked it out the window, and they never spoke of it again. Another cry from the queen, another push. Boop! Out popped the most beautiful baby boy you'd ever hoped to see. Well, that fine little prince, he was the apple of everyone's eye. He was the delight of the kingdom. Everyone was in love with this child. And the next 17 years passed rather uneventfully. And then the time came for the prince to go out and find his own bride. And so he mounted his horse, said farewell to his parents, and rode off in search of a bride. The first crossroads that he came to, up came a great black serpent. It hissed at him It clashed its fangs and said, "Older brothers, marry first." His horse reared up. He turned around. He thought, "I'm going to go the long way around." And he galloped off to go a different way. But the next crossroads he came to, up came the great black serpent. It hissed at him. It clashed its fangs. "Older brothers, marry first." Whoa! The horse reared up and he galloped off a different way. And on this went. Every crossroads he came to the whole day, until there was nothing left to do except head back to the castle. He got back to the castle. He called for an audience with his parents, the king and the queen. They came, and he said, "Anything you want to tell me about the night I was born? Anything at all?" And they said, "Well, no, women singing, dancing, playing drums, there's a midwife. No, nothing remarkable." Really? And so they called for the midwife. "Anything you can tell us about the night the prince was born?" And the midwife thought, let me see. Women dancing, singing, playing drums. There was this little black snaky thing, but we chucked it out the window. Aha. And what the king and the queen did next speaks volumes about the kind of people they were. They went back to their chambers and they considered, and they said, "You know what? This is a prince of the kingdom." And they didn't send out the army to destroy it. They didn't send out an assassin to kill the serpent. No. They said, "This is a prince of the kingdom. We need to invite him home and make a place for him here." And that's exactly what they did. They sent out the poets and the minstrels, and they wooed the serpent prince back to the castle. So, word was sent out to all the neighboring kingdoms that in fact, the eldest prince of the kingdom was indeed looking for a bride. And beyond that, they just didn't say too much. Well, the applicants all lined up. The first princess came. They didn't say anything until she got to the altar. Too late for the poor girl to back out. Vows were exchanged. The serpent grabbed her and dragged her back to the wedding chamber. The next day, when the king and the queen went into the wedding chamber to check on things, they opened the door, and there was just a pile of bones in the corner. Clearly, the prince had eaten her. Well, on and on it went, princess after princess after princess, until the castle got a bit of a reputation as a place where you go, but you don't come back. As you might imagine, the number of applicants trickled off. And so the king and the queen were quite surprised when yet one more woman offered herself in marriage to the prince. Now, this woman, she wasn't a princess from the neighboring kingdoms. Oh no, she was the daughter of a shepherd from their own kingdom. And as a shepherd's daughter, she had a deep and abiding relationship with the land. And after she received word that the king and the queen had accepted her as a bride for the prince, she went into the forest. She thought, "Oh my stars, what have I done? What did I just get myself into? Why did I say I would do this?" And she sat down on an old log in front of an even older oak tree to consider her situation and what might be done. And just then, an old woman emerged from the oak tree. "My dear, what troubles you so?" And the shepherd's daughter explained the situation. "Ah, easily solved. Yes, you must send word to the king and the queen that you require a year and a day to prepare for the wedding. In that time, you must sew 12 nightshirts. Over each nightshirt, where your heart would be, you must sew a beautiful and intricate design. You will also need a bath of lye, 2 steel scrub brushes, and a bath of milk." And with that, the old woman melted back into the oak tree. Well, the shepherd's daughter did exactly as she was instructed. She sent word to the castle she would need a year and a day to prepare. She went home to her place and she got busy sewing the nightshirts. The year and the day passed, and it was time for the wedding. She came to the altar, and there came the serpent prince. She said, "Ah, my husband." Well, he wasn't used to this response. Vows were exchanged. He grabbed her and began to drag her back to the wedding chamber. And when they got inside the chamber, he said, "Take off your clothes." And she said, "I will take off one of my nightshirts if you will shed one of your layers of scales." He'd never had such an offer before. So curious. Usually they were quivering with fear by this point. He was intrigued. He was curious. "Okay," he agreed. And she took off one of her nightshirts. And he shed one of his layers of scales. And let me tell you, my friends, it was painful. And when he had finished, he said, "Take off your clothes." And she said, "I'll shed one more layer of my nightshirt if you will shed a layer of your scales." And so he agreed. She took off another nightshirt and he shed another layer of scales. And if you thought the first layer coming off was painful, the second layer was excruciating. And on it went, my friends, all through the night, through all 12 nightshirts, until at the very end, he was no longer a great black serpent, but just a royal mess on the floor. And she scooped that mess up and she put it in the bath of lye. And she took the steel scrub brush and she began to scrub. And she scrubbed and she scrubbed and she scrubbed. And when that scrub brush was dull, she set it down and picked up the second one and scrubbed and scrubbed and scrubbed. And if you thought the scales coming off were painful, this was horrendous. But she scrubbed until she no longer saw the mess. And in that mess, from the chaos, emerged the face of a young man who had been sent into exile 17 years before. And when she had scrubbed away everything that wasn't him, she picked him up, so tender, so sore, and she put him in that bath of milk, and she soothed him. Well, the next morning, when the king and queen came into the chamber to check on the wedding, they expected to see a pile of bones like they'd seen every other time before. But instead, when they opened the chamber door, they saw a beautiful young couple in what the Irish would call radiant contentment. Well, what happened next? Well, some people say they lived happily ever after. And some people say they lived happily enough until one night a deep sorrow came to sleep in the bed between them. So which is it? I don't know. It's not mine to say. But this I do know. In that ancient place, deep inside your heart, where stories are told and stories are carried, there is a woman with an educated heart and a man who has learned to shed his scales.